There are three kinds of copyright statuses for all intents and purposes with teachers and fair use. First is copyrighted, and specifically copyrighted and unlicensed. Second is licensed, and licensed is a type of copyright. It's a copyright with certain permissions to use it. And then, of course, there's public domain, and I'll talk about all three of these here. So the first kind of material is copyrighted and unlicensed material. You should assume that any resource is copyrighted and unlicensed unless you know otherwise. We'll talk about how to know otherwise as we get to the other types, but in general, assume it's copyrighted. For the most part, it's unethical to take copyrighted and unlicensed material and reproduce it. Now, there are some exceptions. And if you look at the article linked later in this lesson, Thinking Through Fair Use, you might get some ideas about that, but for all intents and purposes, I think it's safest to just assume that copyrighted and unlicensed material should be treated as such. And so, if you want to use copyrighted and unlicensed material in your classroom, the safest thing to do is just to link out to it. You can send students out to that website, let them look at it there, and come back to your class. And in that case, you're not making any copies. If the original owner of the material wants to let you embed it, they'll make it easy for you to embed it. So on YouTube, for example, all that material, for the most part, is allowed to be embedded. And an owner of the video can set it so that the video can't be embedded, and you'll see that once you try to embed it. So it can go either way with copyright, but you'll know when it's allowed to be embedded. And uploading is strictly out because it requires you to make a copy of the material, which you cannot ethically do. Now, some copyrighted material is licensed. You're free to redistribute it under certain circumstances as allowed by the license holder. So obviously in this case, you can still link to the material. You can still let people go out and see the resource in its original context, not a problem. But the license may allow you to embed or upload it conditionally. Usually it requires you to give some sort of attribution to say who provided the material and link to it. And there may be other requirements. For example, you may not be allowed to change the material, or you may not be able to use it for commercial purposes. And the most common license you'll see for resources you find on the web are various Creative Commons licenses. Now, there's a common misconception that Creative Commons licenses allow you to do whatever you want with the material, and that's not the case. With each Creative Commons piece of media you want to use, you need to click on the linked license and see what you're allowed to do. And it will tell you that you can remix it or reshare it, use it for commercial purposes, whatever applies for that particular item. Finally, public domain resources are free for you to use for whatever purpose you like, so you can link, embed, or upload at will. Generally, things fall into the public domain because they're really old, so 19th century novels or Renaissance paintings or whatever are in the public domain and free to use as you like. A copyright holder can release something into the public domain, so you will sometimes see that as well. There's an article later in this lesson all about the public domain, and those sorts of resources can be really useful in your class. Of course, it's not a bad idea to still give attribution even when using resources in the public domain, because it's good to model for your students that sort of thing. They always need to cite resources in their research papers, and so it's probably best for you to cite the resources you're using. Even if you don't use formal MLA style or whatever, giving a name and a link is a good idea. So, to sum up, there are the copyright statuses and what you can do with them.